welcome to Western Insights. Western's College of Business and Economics created this series of discussions to connect the university's wide range of subject matter experts with external guests to discuss various aspects of the coronavirus and how it's impacted our daily lives and businesses. Up until now, we've stayed away from discussing the medical aspects of COVID-19. We've waited until we got to a point where we could lend our expertise via Western Insights to more forward thinking rather than a response. Since last March, we've waited patiently to offer this episode. We marked the date by realizing that yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the first US case of COVID-19. As vaccinations begin to roll out in the United States, we're getting a better idea of the path forward to reopening and finding a new normal for all of us. But the details matter. Let's set aside social media and the I heard machine for a few minutes today and drill into some facts. What should we be thinking about regarding vaccines? What about the mental health impacts of all the changes we faced and will face still? We all have big questions and we're looking for informed thoughts. Whether you're a business owner or a manager, someone in public policy arena, or just a person trying to make sense of where we're going, today is your moment to collect primary information from experts. This is where we're starting today's topic. Joining us today is Dr. David Hansen, who began his career working in finance and marketing. After participating in numerous volunteer medical missions in Central America, Dr. Hansen left corporate America to pursue a life in medicine. Dr. Hansen earned his medical degree at Brown University School of Medicine. He then completed his training at the Tacoma Family Medicine Residency Program. He is a board-certified family physician and has been with Western's Student Health Center since 2017. Dr. Sarah Godoy is a clinical psychologist who earned her doctorate from American University and completed her postdoctoral fellowship at the University of Michigan. She is currently the director of the Counseling Center at Western Washington University. Dr. Godoy has specialties working with LGBTQ+ students and students who have experienced trauma. She is honored to have been a 2019 recipient of the Association of University and College Counseling Center Directors Harriet Coffer Haynes Diversity Leadership Mentorship Award. Moderating our discussion today is Dr. Cislina Ledbetter, Executive Director of Western's Counseling, Health, and Wellness. Dr. Ledbetter is a social psychologist, researcher, lecturer, author, and life coach. She received a bachelor's degree in psychology from North Carolina Central University, magna cum laude. She earned with honors her master and doctoral degrees in psychology from Howard University. Her postgraduate studies include educational leadership, training at Georgetown University Graduate School of Professional Studies and Harvard University Graduate School of Education. She has received several fellowships and internships, including as an intern during the Clinton administration. A little bit of housekeeping before we dive in. Closed captioning is available for this event. Using Zoom, you may activate this feature at any time. Some of you have submitted questions with your registration, and we do always appreciate those coming in ahead. If you have additional questions today, don't be shy. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom middle of your screen. We will be responding to questions throughout the discussion today, so don't delay. Drop those in as you have them. Okay, Cislina, let's dive in.
Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate the introductions, and I was kind of jarred by yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of the first case in Washington State, no doubt. And so many things have happened since then. I'm excited to be having a conversation today with Drs. Hansen and Godoy. We've been working feverishly, weekly, daily sometimes, on managing Western's response to this pandemic. And certainly it has had not only a physical impact, as we've noticed in our communities, and now we're talking about the vaccination, but it's also had a mental health impact and an emotional impact on our students, their families, our communities at large in the Bellingham community. So I'm gonna ask a few questions, and I'm gonna just jump in and ask this question of you, David. Dr. Fauci and President Biden have been talking about 100 million doses in 100 days. And so this is a multi-part question, but I know you can follow. So how realistic is that? And how likely is it going to be delivered into the communities that need it most?
Well, Cislina, I think that is the question of the day. And I think with the change in the administration, my hope is that we will see some broader direction from at the federal level that will help guide states and states then guiding counties in this massive effort that's taking place. You know, I think what's pretty extraordinary about this process is that in very short order, we've been able to develop some very complex vaccines. Moderna and Pfizer are now out. There are 3 that are in phase 3 trials. And so I think there's going to be some advantage to having additional vaccines available to help with this process. So I think, you know, I think the general consensus is that 100 million doses in 100 days is reasonable and ambitious, but probably still not enough. You know, I think that as Moderna and Pfizer are able to continue broader distribution and production, hopefully we'll be seeing more than that in the coming months. And my hope is that, you know, as we start to prioritize folks and get those vaccinations in folks at highest risk, then that allows production to stretch on to folks who hopefully by summer, late spring, will be getting vaccines.
Yeah, and you mentioned Moderna and Pfizer, and we've had questions about the differences. So I know Johnson and Johnson and AstraZeneca, and there are others that are, you know, in trials. What is the difference among those vaccines? Are there differences?
Yeah, it can be a little confusing because there's a lot of new technology that has gone into developing these vaccines. In the past, the traditional method of vaccine development was literally to cut a molecule off a live virus and inject it into somebody. And that small amount was just enough to stimulate an immune response, but not to get anybody sick. These new delivery methods for these vaccines are, what they do is they use a little fat globule that there's some RNA or DNA put into the globule, and then the globule is what's absorbed by the cell. And so this new messenger RNA or messenger DNA type of vaccine is what Moderna and Pfizer are. There are also other I think they're looking at some gene editing technology for other types. So I think the good news is these different vaccines will allow us to have a much better sense of what works in some, like there may be some vaccines that work better for certain populations, and then production can focus on that. There may be vaccines that work for better age groups. And so all of these different vaccines will come through, but the new technology is this messenger RNA that's in both of those. And also, I believe the other 3 are AstraZeneca, Janssen, and Novavax.
Novavax.
I believe those are all also messenger RNA or probably gene editing. None of the vaccines are small pieces of the COVID virus injected into you. They're all protected and allow for the cell to mount the immune response that's necessary.
Yeah, so that's super clinical and lots of great detail, but no doubt it's very meaningful. And I'm going to pivot here and talk about, ask Sarah to kind of dive in a little bit as to why that's so meaningful. One of the things that David was talking about when he talked about injecting live vaccine really harkens back to a time when you think about things like why Black and Brown people really struggle with the vaccine. And there's, you know, you hear people say things like they're still in clinical trials and there are many of them coming out. There's a lot of anxiety around taking this vaccine, particularly for Black and Brown people. How can people that's a long setup, right? How can people, Black and brown people, deal with their anxiety? How can we address the anxiety that they have around taking this vaccine?
That is a tremendously important question. And I want to thank you for asking that early on. I think the first step is to acknowledge that that anxiety is very valid. When we think about some kinds of anxiety, playing the what if game in our minds, we can kind of say, okay, if I take a step back, then I might be able to see that a lot of this is just worry, that my mind is being filled with things that are likely not to happen. And, I can learn to let go of that. When we're talking about this particular kind of anxiety or skepticism, I think we have to acknowledge that there's a historical context to that Black and brown folks have not historically been treated well by the medical field. And I include mental health in that as well. So I think we have to validate that anxiety and understand that it's coming from a place of survival and protection.
Yeah.
At the same time, we have a tremendous ray of hope with these vaccines, and I cannot emphasize that enough. These vaccines are, I think, a tremendous sign that things are improving, that we are emerging from this pandemic, and that we are so much closer to being able to engage in person and start to regain a sense of normalcy. So I think my biggest piece of advice in this regard is, if you are someone who is very skeptical of this vaccine or is even fearful of this vaccine, validate that. Yeah. Also, speak to your healthcare providers, speak to the healers in your community, because I think that learning about what these vaccines entail and what the risks are and what the benefits are is so important. It's worth having a conversation. At the end of the day, some people might still decide this is not for me. And my hope is that by engaging in conversation and education, that number of people who do choose to get vaccinated safely will only increase. So validate and reach out to your healers.
Thank you, Dr. Godoy. I'm going to take a question from the audience.
Cicilline, I was going to just, if I might, just one additional piece from Dr. Godoy, and that was, the Kaiser Family Foundation has done some pretty important surveys on the role of vaccines. They started with one in September and they did a follow-up in December. And interestingly, among Black and brown populations, about half don't trust vaccines in general. And they also, about half also feels that they are worried that they will get COVID from the vaccine. And so, I think as Dr. Godoy mentioned, it really is about education, and I really appreciate the comment about having that connection with healthcare providers, because that's where we know that group is probably the most trusted among this population, among all populations actually. So thank you.
Absolutely. So this is a question from our audience. What is the difference between the first and second dose of the vaccine? Do you get any immunity from the first dose? And I'll ask that of Dr. Hansen.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we need to sort of do is think about the COVID vaccine like other vaccines. And many of them require a booster. So the reason there are two shots is that the immune response does kick in, and the reports are that with both Moderna and with Pfizer vaccines, there's about an 85% efficacy, which means 85% of the time you're protected. But quite honestly, prior to these vaccines, 85% alone was pretty darn good. But the wonderful news with these vaccines is that after the second shot, or the booster, which kicks the immune system into overdrive again, we have about 95 94% efficacy, which means it really can prevent serious illness from COVID.
Okay. And just sort of a follow on to that thought, when you think about herd immunity, it's a term that's sort of been bandied about, and a lot of folks don't quite understand what herd immunity is. So I'd like for you to kind of extend that point and take a moment to share with people exactly what herd immunity is.
Yeah, I think I like to I prefer to call it community immunity.
Community immunity. Okay.
I like that.
We'll take that. Okay.
It rhymes.
Yeah,
But and I think the herd immunity term came from vaccinating cows, and so it's probably better that we stick with community immunity.
Community immunity. Okay, we'll take that. We'll take that.
Okay. Well, I think the important thing is in a situation like this, where we're seeing surges across the country of infection, it means that people don't have sufficient immunity. That's why they're all getting sick. And so there are two ways that folks can develop immunity. One is to actually get COVID and recover from COVID. That builds the immune response for future infections. We do know that people can get reinfected, but the rate is much lower. Herd immunity or community immunity is really about building up the community's level of immunity enough so that virus doesn't have anywhere else to go and kind of fizzles out. And so, I think in talking to our local county experts, their goal is to have about 85% herd immunity, community immunity,
Yes.
to achieve that goal. And so I think that's probably part of a national strategy that's similar.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay. So community and immunity, a new phrase in my vocabulary, community immunity. I'm going to pivot to an audience question for you, Sarah. And that is, if hybrid classes will be in session in the future, will students be able to continue with using Zoom instead of physically showing up in class? And I'm asking that with the, and also infusing the context of how we're providing mental health and telemental health services. So I guess if I could rephrase the question, where do you think teleservices are going to be in higher education in the future for both in-classroom sessions and for mental health services?
I think this is an area where the pandemic has given us a great gift. I'm going to say we very broadly, healthcare providers, educators,
Sure.
Human beings have I think really feared the use of telemeetings, teleeducation, telehealth for some very good reasons. I want to acknowledge that. However, during this past year, really, I think we've seen how much flexibility it can afford us. So I don't think teleservices are going away. When it comes to telehealth, this is something that at Western, I know will certainly continue to be part of how we offer services to our student population. There are just always going to be some people who need that sort of flexibility, who don't have the time for a variety of reasons, who might not have the access to in-person services, but can get on their phone, can get on their computer and meet with a provider. With education, I think there are still benefits, that same sort of thing. Some students are really going to benefit from being able to take advantage of asynchronous learning. This might be a format that works a lot better for them, where they can more effectively communicate through a computer, through a video. And at the same time, I think we're also hearing a lot of reports from students who much prefer in-person education. So I don't think teleservices to this extent will be our new normal post-pandemic, but I feel pretty excited by how we can creatively use technology to expand access to healthcare and to education.
Wow. Well, I predict that the DSM is going to have another phrase, and it's going to be Zoom burnout.
Zoom burnout is real. Zoom burnout is real. And so that's a piece also that we have increased access because of this technology, but we also have some increased negative side effects.
It is a
like
lot.
eye fatigue,
Yes.
loss of connection, and loss of physical activity. So those are things that we absolutely need to keep in mind as we bring technology into our
Absolutely.
future.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that down the road there'll be studies on, and there probably already have been, on what is too much. How many meetings are too much? 7 meetings back to back in front of the screen are likely too much. But someone will empirically study that and then rebut everything I just said. We have a follow-up question, and this is going to sort of shift to thinking about the K through 12, right? So this question for you, Sarah: I'm an elementary school counselor. What is the key focus and perhaps specific examples of what you would suggest to best support students and families during distance learning, keeping in mind the extreme overload of technology, screen time, that driven communication that is driving the way they're communicating right now? So what advice can you give to this elementary school counselor?
The first thing that pops into my mind is the word balance. And with that, I have to clarify that balance does not mean perfect balance. It does not mean a 50-50 divide. Rather, we can think of balance as an exercise in trying to achieve harmony. So for distance learning, that might mean creating a space within your home that can be focused on distance learning, that can be focused on education. That does not have to be a home office. That is not something that many people have, but it could be just a little corner of the room or a particular part of your kitchen table where you're engaging in distance learning. Structure is going to be really important as well. When everything is in person, we usually have a time where we need to be at school or in the office. A class begins, it ends at a certain time. With distance learning, that might not take place in quite the same structure, but to the extent that we can create a sense of normalcy, we feel better. We feel less anxious when things are certain. The harmony piece also comes in, though, where we need a break from that. And just because we can do 7 meetings back to back, or we can do 10 classes back to back, does not mean we should. The brain can only retain so much information. We need breaks in order to synthesize all of that information, but also to remind ourselves that there's something else happening in our world. So I like the idea of families perhaps creating some connection time into their structure where screens are not there. Screens used to be a way to unwind pre-pandemic. We'd be on our phones playing a little game or sending a text or pulling up Netflix. That is not going to be the same kind of unwinding now that we're constantly in front of a screen. So can there be a walk that you take as a family over lunch? Can there be a rule that just, phones away, screens away, our eyeballs need a break. We need to speak to one another. Can we go to the park? Can we go to the playground? Can we read a physical book? Just talk as a family. So I think about the importance of creating some separation for screen time and making sure that you're having time to engage in real life.
Yeah, I love it. That's great. Speaking of speaking to each other, I'm thinking about the age cutoff, 16-year-olds. So I'm still in K through 12. 16-year-olds is the cutoff, right, for the virus, the vaccine, David, right? So if you are...
It depends on the vaccine.
Okay.
So Pfizer is 16 and older.
Oh.
And the Moderna is 18 and older.
Okay.
And I don't know what the requirements or specifications for the 3 that are in the phase 3 trials will be.
Okay. So do you know why there's we do not offer the vaccine for younger kids?
I think it's because, this is still we have to remember that these vaccines are still under emergency use
Mm.
authorization, and
Okay.
higher risk folks that there wasn't enough data on are
Mm.
those that were the ones that were kind of cautioned to hold back. So pregnant mothers, breastfeeding moms, children, there really wasn't a lot of data or research into those groups. Um, Beyond that, I'm not sure. There are vaccines that we currently use that are only given later, like the meningitis vaccine,
Mhm.
that are given kind of at 16 to 18 years old, and boosters beyond that. So I'm not sure exactly, but I suspect that a major part of that is that we just don't have enough data yet to see how young it could go.
Okay. Thank you for that. So we have another question from the audience. Why would the RNA-based vaccine initiate the release of antibodies for COVID-19 and not be effective for mutants or variants of the original virus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and this is what you see typically with viruses. They mutate very quickly.
Yeah.
All of us can attest to that because we still get a cold every year,
Right.
even though we've been exposed to the hundreds of viruses over our lifetimes, and we have immunity to those. And so the variants of the coronavirus are to be expected in in the way that viruses respond. And so I think the question is an excellent one, and I don't have a really good answer for that. I think, you know, so much of the research and development was around what we knew. And my hope is that as we understand more about the variants, the vaccines can adapt.
Mhm. Yeah, and I was, I don't know whether this is sort of an extension, but the same sets of vaccines might apply to the COVID variants. Is that correct? Or would we need to develop different vaccines for COVID
Yeah,
variants?
that's a great
That's,
question too, and I think that I suspect that folks that are still in development might
yeah,
be trying to tweak them
yeah,
to provide that. And you have to remember that this is a vaccine for the entire world, and the variants are going to be different across. You know, if it's Asia versus Africa versus Europe versus North America, they could be very different, and so
mhm,
I think that will continue to be an issue, but
mhm,
at this point, I would just strongly continue to recommend when the vaccines are available that everyone get it so that we
yeah,
can begin this community immunity process.
yeah. And, you know, speaking of community immunity and vaccine rollout, the vaccine response has been really uneven from the federal government. And, you know, all of us have kind of been thinking about when are we going to get the vaccine? When is it going to come? Um, when you think about, you know, in higher education and where we're going to be if everyone gets if we get the rollout, even though it isn't inadequate, right? 100,000 in 100 days. What is your best thought about where we'll be in the fall if the 100,000 in 100 days happens?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to listen to Dr. Fauci,
Yeah.
who yesterday really kind of tried to address that as best he could,
Yeah.
and to say that with a more concerted national effort and with hopefully with more state sort of participation at similar levels, and with those states being able to reach out to those populations that may be more disenfranchised, whether it's socioeconomically, whether they're very rural, um, that those, if they can deliver enough vaccines and get the rollout going, I think Dr. Fauci felt hopeful
Mhm.
that by, early fall, we would have some sense of a new normal.
Mm.
But, I think a lot depends on what happens, I would say, in the next 30 days.
Mm.
To just see where we're going. We have such a significant shift with a new administration, and my hope is that there will be some national efforts to make the vaccine rollout equitable for everybody across the country. And quite frankly, I'm encouraged that we're now back in the World Health Organization, because that also addresses equity across the world when it comes to vaccines. We're already hearing from, the underdeveloped countries that are like, we're not even on any list. And so how can we help to support that effort as well? I mean, there's 7 billion people that need vaccines.
I think
So
that just
crazy.
highlights that just highlights how much of a collective effort this is. We've been looking to the Dr. Fauci's of the world, the scientists of the world, to get us to this point where we finally have not just one vaccine, but a couple of vaccines that are going to be more and more available to us. And for the general public, this is our moment. The scientists did their part, and they will continue to do their part, don't get me wrong. But I think it's actually very empowering for those of us who are not in vaccine development, to step up and to be part of this worldwide healing. There's been undoubtedly so much pain, so much trauma over this past year with this pandemic. And I think that we have an opportunity, just as ordinary people, to be part of the movement forward. We can get vaccinated if that is something that is going to be safe for us. We can help advocate for communities who need it to get vaccine access. So this is an exciting moment, and it takes everyone. It really does.
Yeah. Dr. Godoy, I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, because our national figures have also talked about how we haven't seen the worst of this. And every time I hear that, I flinch, and I'm thinking, you have got to be kidding me. We haven't seen the worst of this
But
yet.
wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. And there is this, what I call shadow pandemic of mental health. We heard Dr. Hansen talk about where he thinks that we might be in the fall of 2021 with students, all students, right, K through 20, returning to their various campuses. What are the likely impacts, mental health, of this not being quite over the hump yet on mental health?
I think of there being a survival mode and a thriving mode, surviving and thriving. I want to make those two rhyme a little bit more. I was inspired by community immunity.
Yes, there we go.
So what we're seeing now, currently, what we have been seeing over these past several months is a lot of surviving, of maybe wanting to have hope that things will get better, but feeling that repeated letdown, disappointment, hopelessness when things don't get better in the way that we would like them to. So I think a lot of what we're seeing now, the anxiety coming through the cracks, the depression, the sense of isolation, disconnection, fear, anxiety, these are, all clustering together. Yeah. They know each other quite well. I think that is coming out through the cracks, and also just in spurts for a lot of people. So with that, though, I think that we have to have hope that we will go into the thriving component when this is all over. I also acknowledge that there's not going to be a clear during COVID and after COVID. This is going to be such a gradual process. So I think when we resume in person and we get back to that normal functioning, there is no normal, by the way.
That's right. That's right.
I think we're going to see a lot of people expecting that they should be in thriving mode because, hey, it's over. We made it. Everything's great. that's going to take some time to get to. We're going to get to thriving mode. I have no doubt in that. I have faith in my fellow human beings.
Yeah.
But it reminds me of how at the end of each semester, there's the end of semester cold. Like, all right, we made it. We studied for finals. We took our exams. We're good. Classes are done. And then the exhaustion sets in. And then everyone gets sick and you need to stay in bed for a couple of days and you're just so dang tired. I think we're going to see that on a worldwide level. You know, we're going to have the end of COVID cold. And that's okay too. I think we need to have some compassion for ourselves that once we don't have to be in survival mode so much, that's when I think a lot more will come to the surface. So we need to be on the lookout for that. We need to look out for each other and really make an effort to support each other. Then we'll move into thriving.
I love that. All right. So we have another question from the audience. And this one is for you, David. Are there concerns or things to be aware of before taking the vaccine if someone has already had COVID and is experiencing post-COVID syndrome?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. And one of those questions that I don't know if there's a great answer to, but I'll try my best. I would actually argue that if someone has had COVID and is struggling with post-COVID syndrome, that I would not get the vaccine. I would wait for probably 2 to 3 months to make sure that those symptoms have resolved. Remember, the body is getting hit with another round of sort of exposure to the virus, and so if your body hasn't completely healed from the first bout, it could have more negative effects than it would if you were out of that post-COVID syndrome. So I would wait.
Okay. Here's a sort of a follow-up, and this is about vaccination strategy, right? If we had the answer to this, we'd all be quadrillionaires, huh? All right. Phase 1. So they're asking about the vaccination strategy. Phase 1A and 1B are focused on medical first responders and older adults, 65 and older. But aren't younger workers who are out and about more likely to spread the disease? Maybe older folks are better able to stay home, retirees, etc., so that younger, more mobile populations can more quickly be immunized. And what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, this is a great observation as well. I think, we have to go back to when these vaccines were first developed. There's a group called the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, and that group pretty much makes recommendations to the CDC about vaccinations and where to go from there. That group is called ACIP, and ACIP's guidelines basically drove the phases that we are seeing across states in terms of rollout, both from the CDC, but also at the state level. The priority has been to focus on those highest at risk. So right now, if you look at folks, the over 400,000 folks who have died, those folks are generally older and tend to have other comorbid illnesses like diabetes or hypertension or other immunocompromised states. So I think that there's the priority has been to focus on those highest at risk. The American College Health Association is now looking at this very question to say, wow, we have a lot of these young adults out there who at the end of spring will be taking off for the summer and potentially spreading disease without knowing it, because many of them are asymptomatic carriers. So I think we're going to see some, I think we'll see some rethinking of those guidelines at some point to perhaps address this very question, because I think it has some real validity here. But I think the real priority is to make sure that those who have the highest risk, those who have the highest morbidity, are vaccinated first.
Mhm. Thank you. There is another question from the audience, and it is there any talk about providing vaccines specifically to college students, administration, and faculty ahead of the general population?
I can take that one too, if you
David,
want.
David, it would be.
Take it away, Dr. Hanson.
Sorry, Sarah. Yeah. So actually, I think I can only speak from Western's perspective,
Yes.
but I can say that at Western, we have literally developed a vaccine strike force team to look into this and to look into how best to make this happen. So right now, the thinking is, how can we do this and support our community? So if we are able to get vaccines in sufficient quantities to support all of Western, then that would be a mission that I personally think we would want to take on to help take that burden off our county so that they can focus on everybody else. So right now, all of that is in the works, and we are trying to brainstorm about how best to make that work.
Great. So speaking of burden on community, the mental health burden has been great, right? And it's exacerbated. Thinking about counseling centers, whether they're in K through 12, where they have counselors, or higher ed, how can we find ways to reach those populations that historically we have not been able to reach? What are some of the creative ideas you have to share about how we might be able to do this job, this really hard job, better?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. I think we have a few options. So to tie back in our question about technology from earlier, I think this is absolutely something that we need to be using when we talk about providing mental health services, especially for folks in rural areas. If you're a university in a rural area, if a lot of your students come from rural areas, if a lot of your students are in families that don't have internet access or a laptop, we need to do better. and I think that Western has been actually doing quite a nice job with this, where we need to make things like computers available to students so that they can check that out and have that sort of basic technology in order to work from home, work from their dorm room. We need to have platforms in place where students can log in and meet with a provider who's in their jurisdiction, who's licensed to practice there. We need to be creative. There are so many things like mental health apps, podcasts, where we have an opportunity to also just rethink what mental health support even means. What does that even look like? Why can't we utilize things like apps and podcasts in part of someone's healing? This is also, I think, a really nice opportunity to look at what sorts of healing practices have counseling centers, have mental health professionals typically elevated, and what could we maybe do a little bit less of, a little bit more of. So for us at Western, this has been a really great time to just reevaluate how we define support. It's been a time to think about, how do we include things like yoga, meditation, nature walks as part of our definition of healing. Those are things that can happen on university campus. Those are things that can happen in your home, in your home community. So I think making technology accessible,
Yes.
and also just broadening our definition of what support looks like, that is the way through this. It's been a really refreshing change to see more and more agencies and individuals doing that.
Great, thank you. All right, I have another question. What should we really be thinking about K through 12 until we have a children's vaccine? So I think this is a question for David. What should K through 12 be thinking about right now until we have a vaccine for the kids? Is having community immunity enough? Or should we be thinking about the long-term impacts of kids contracting COVID?
Yeah, I think we should be thinking about both.
Yeah.
Both the long term and the more immediate term around what community immunity would look like.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's still a lot of research going on about what the relationship between the coronavirus and children is. And I don't think we still know that really well. I think that early we heard a lot of news about how they weren't carriers, and they were carriers, but didn't get quite so sick. And so I think, you know, if you think about this, this has been a year. And the amount of information that we have been able to collect and understand about the coronavirus and its impacts on all of us has been, pretty extraordinary. The problem is we still don't know. So I think addressing some of the mental health questions and sort of the developmental issues that come up around K through 12, I think, the priority would be to make sure that the teachers and all of the support staff are vaccinated and are protected, so that they themselves don't get sick, and so that they can continue to do the work that they need to do to help the developmental side of these children and help, I think, the mental health of both groups, all of
Yeah,
us.
yeah. I think you touched on this. Thank you, Dr. Hanson. Dr. Godoy, I think you touched on this a little bit. I wonder if you want to expand a little bit on the implications of COVID on K through 12 and what teachers and students and administrators need to be prepared for or thinking about as everybody just sort of reemerges on what it feels like to be in classroom or some hybrid form. What kinds of things do they need to be thinking about in terms of mental health and emotional health?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's really important to consider. I think as we resume more and more in-person instruction for K through 12, teachers and really anyone working in a school will have to be on the lookout for some signs of the equivalent of the end of semester cold. So I'm imagining things like kids just having a bit of difficulty sitting behind a desk again and looking up at the front of the classroom, because they might be coming back after months of staring at a laptop or kind of wandering away from the laptop. I know that happens. I had nieces and nephews. I know that they get distracted and go over to play with the dog. They're children. That's fine. That's what they want to do. So I think some of the attentional difficulties, be on the lookout for that. I think we just need to expect that will happen. I also imagine, though, a lot of students who are struggling with some of the social aspects. This K through 12 is the time where we learn how to interact, how we learn how to be a social being. And I know for a lot of caregivers, this is exactly the reason that remote instruction has been so difficult. There's so much worry as a caregiver. How will my child learn how to have a conversation? How will they learn how to manage conflict? How will they learn how to share when they can't do that with their peers? So I think we're going to see a lot of struggles in that as we resume in-person instruction. The good thing, though, is that our brains are so flexible, and especially as a kid, you might have a bit of a delay. You might have an initial struggle period as you try to get back into the swing of how we are meant to be, which is socially, but children will catch up. There's going to be a rough period, but they are going to get there. They are going to learn the skills that they need in order to communicate effectively, learn effectively. I think the biggest thing here is going to be having a lot of patience, a lot of frustration tolerance, and a lot of compassion, that for teachers, for janitorial staff, for principals, for students, everyone's going to be emerging from a fog through this. So no one's going to do it perfectly. It's not going to feel the way that it did before. We're all going to have a period of adjustment, and that's okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Another question, speaking of brain flexibility, there are multiple symptoms that folks experience when they have come down with COVID. What are some of the long-term, long is relative, I know, right? We've been at this for about a year, but what are the long-term impacts, or do we know yet? And this is for you, Dr. Hansen, of having COVID-19. Do we know?
Yeah, it's really all over the board.
Yeah.
You know, there are folks who recover completely and don't have any symptoms. There are folks in the middle who sort of have, you know, perhaps continued shortness of breath and fatigue. Some have mental kind of, they describe it as feeling foggy for a couple weeks afterward. And then those folks in the post-COVID syndrome could have lingering symptoms for, you know, 6-8 weeks. And those are also variable. I think we're still learning a lot about the impact on the body from COVID and how best to manage these symptoms. But I think, you know, folks with who have had the loss of taste or smell, some of those folks, even today, months after their infection, are still showing signs of continued loss of taste and smell, and we don't understand why. So I think this, again, is a great hotbed of research that we will be seeing over the next few years. But I think for now, we're kind of left with what we anecdotally are observing.
Wow. Yeah. And then, you know, while we're talking about sort of impact and effects, I know one of the things that my mother said to me is, oh my goodness, that's a really long needle of all the things, of all the things. So tell us about the shot, and whether your own experience or for those that you know about, tell us about how the impact of the shot. Is it painful? Do you recover quickly? Is there some type of a post-COVID syndrome or post-shot syndrome that comes with the shot? Tell us about the shot. It's so there's so many people that have questions about that.
Well, I will say, having received my first vaccine just a week ago, I would say, and I received the Moderna,
Okay.
and I felt like I had gotten a tetanus shot. So basically, I had a sore arm for about 10 or 12 hours, not so sore that I couldn't use it. And then after that, I've been fine. Checking with folks in our staff who also got vaccinated on Friday, a little bit of a variety. Some people's arms were sore for a couple days. I think what I'm hearing is that the second shot, the booster, that comes either 3 weeks or a month later, depending on which vaccine you get, that's the one that packs a little bit more of a punch. And so I think most folks need to understand that you could be out a couple days with kind of feeling feverish or general fatigue. But I will say it is absolutely worth it. So be prepared, but also look forward to a time when you don't have to worry about catching it.
Thank you. That's a great last word for you, Dr. Hansen. And Dr. Godoy, do you have anything you'd like to end with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think if there can be a mental health takeaway, it's the acknowledgement that we are in a time that most of us, hopefully all of us, will never ever experience again, ever again in our lifetime. And with that comes actually a tremendous sense of connection. This is a shared experience that we have with every single human being on this planet. That's remarkable. So let's all try to have a little bit more compassion for ourselves for struggling. And let's try to seek out the signs of hope that things are getting better and that we'll all be able to be back in person and healthy again.
Thank you so much. So Dr. Godoy, Dr. Hansen, I am so grateful that you have taken the time to share with us today and our audience. Thank you to our audience who has jumped in and engaged with us. These are two of the smartest people that I know, and I could talk to them for another hour, but we're going to end there and turn it back over to James McCafferty. And thank you to James for giving us an opportunity to share with your community. We are really grateful for that.
We're a little spoiled at Western because you're all internal for us. So for those in the audience from Western, these are our folks. So you know how to find them. But for everyone, thank you for joining us today for Western Insights. From all of us at Western Washington University and the College of Business and Economics, we want to thank you for joining us today. We also want to thank the Western Alumni Association and the Western Foundation for their support of this series. And we know that they would like us to thank those of you who chose to support the college's Students of Color and Opportunity Scholarship as part of this effort. In 2 weeks, on February 5th, we'll be presenting a discussion focused on national public policy directions, something probably on most of our minds right now. As the new administration aims to make its mark on U.S. policy, both foreign and domestic, there's going to be a lot to discuss. And this is actually going to be a part one of 2 parts of a Western Insight series. The second one after that will be on focusing just on China. Registration is going to open in just about a week for that session, so be on the lookout for that. This and previous Western Insights sessions are available online for your viewing pleasure. Yes, you can come back and watch this all over again. We'll be sending you an email later today with a link to those sessions, further resources from our panel, and also an invitation, of course, to give us your feedback on this session. So be sure to take a look for that in your box. Have a great day, stay safe, mask up, and remember you and your actions are a key part of our long-term recovery effort. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hi, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.